my name is Yvette Maldonado. I am the Training and Development Manager here at Spring Branch ISD. I've been working for the company for a little bit over 6 years now. I have a bachelor's in public communication and I have a minor in human resources. Thank you for joining me on this online training. Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about ethics, ethical awareness. So before we get started on lecture, let's define ethics. So ethics is defined by rules of behavior based on ideas about what is morally good and bad. So something that I want to point out is that ethics goes alongside values and morals. Values is what we think is right and what we believe in, and morals is what we were taught to believe what is right. So the official definition for values is defined as standards or ideals which serve as guides or standards by which we live and make decisions. And morals are practical applications of ethical principles, modes of conduct. If we think about ethics, we think about morals and we think about values. So throughout this training, we are going to be aware to be more aware and promote ethics, but we're definitely going to talk about values and morals as well. So for our first part of the lecture, I'm going to be talking about the 3 steps to making the right decision, which is making an ethical decision. So step number 1, identify. This means identify the problem. So what is the problem and what role you play in within the problem? What can you do to solve it? Once you have identified that, then we can move on to the next step. Step number 2, consider consequences. This is very important because you also have to think of others when you're making a decision. So if you don't want to hurt others' feelings and you don't want to harm others' positions, so you definitely want to be considerate of others. Also, you also have to think about if you could lose your job. You don't want to be fired for a position that you really care about for something that you didn't do right or a decision that you didn't make, with good judgment. So this is very important to look at. Considering your consequences is always something that can affect others, not you as an individual. And it can affect the company, it can affect your family, it can affect your income. So all of those are factors that are built in with your consequences. Step number 3. Implement and monitor. So after you have made the ethical decision, you have to implement it. Once it takes action, once it's in its place, you have to be cautious of who might be affected by this. And you also have to take responsibility, be accountable for your actions. What I mean by this is if you were put in a position where you made an ethical decision, but it affected your peers, then you have to take responsibility and tell the other person, you know what, this might have affected you. Always be honest, and we'll look at that into further detail. So another step for ethical decision making is like the right versus wrong. So I want to suggest these questions so you can ask yourself before you actually make the decision. So let's get started. So is it legal? You always want to ask yourself, am I going to be sued, or is the company that I'm working for, the culture of the organization, going to need legal action for this action? So you have to always think about if you're going to be put in a situation where you might not be comfortable with. Also, is it worth it? Is it really worth making the wrong decision? Or is it really worth for losing your job, like I said earlier, losing your money, losing your paycheck, losing your family even? This is very important because once your resume is built, you don't want to put things that aren't truth, meaning like if you're unethical for a company, they probably won't want to be your reference and you can't have that experience to count on for your next job. And honestly, you lose a lot of credibility. So you want to make sure that you are ethical and you don't lose credibility with promotions, and be positive and stuff like that. So which goes hand in hand with, can I lose my job? So I cannot stress this enough. We've seen so many different types of scenarios in real world where people have lost their job. For example, the Enron scandal, there was a whistleblower and there was people that were acting unethically. Nobody said anything, but they all got the same consequence. So it's, your job really depends on others, and others depend on your job to be ethical. So it's really something that we have to work in together. Values and morals come within a whole culture and also individual. So, which brings me to my last one. Is it morally correct? You have to think of your morals. So if we look back at the definition, which is practical applications of ethical principles and modes of conduct, you have to think, is this action right? Is this action correct? Does this action reflect upon myself as an individual? And would people want to follow my actions? If you think about it, and people not everyone will follow that action, that means that you're probably doing something that's not very ethical. And also, something that we've all learned is that our conscience is always catching up to us. So if you can't sleep at night for a decision that you've made, it's probably because you did something unethical. So the third concept that I want to talk about is ethical leadership. I think that this is very important because we have ethical leaders all over the world. It could be, politics. It could be at a school. It could be, within your family. You can be within an organization, within a culture, within a religion. We all look at ethical leaders and we all look at them to set an example for the rest of society. So, things to point out to be a good ethical leader: be a role model. You want to set a good example so that other people would follow. You want, if you're a father or mother, you want your kids to follow in your footsteps. So that's being a good role model. Be fair. Fairness is a quality that not all of us can practice and not all of us have. But being fair means that you have to think of both sides and you have to look really in depth into both sides to actually make a good leader. Be prudent. By prudence, I mean know when to stay quiet and know when to speak up. Always remember to be respectful when you're speaking out your opinion. Also, don't be egocentric. That's very important. You don't want to just think about yourself. You want to think of others because, like I said earlier, others depend on you and you depend on others. You don't always want to do something that benefits you. And last but not least, be honest. I think that this is very, very important because nobody wants a liar working for them, and you definitely don't want to be working for liars. Once you're a liar, once you lie constantly, it's really hard to catch up with your lies. So you have to make sure that you're honest and your mind is always clear and you're ready to make good decisions. This is one of the best qualities that people and employers look at when they're hiring new people. So this is an overall concept of ethics, the right versus wrong. Ethics is knowing what the right thing to do is and actually taking action upon it. So as a little wrap up of ethic and ethical awareness, I want to do an activity called Guess Who. So I'm going to give you a scenario. I'm going to give you 3 options and you have to choose the correct one. Here it is. It is time to elect the world leader, and yours is the deciding vote. Here are the facts about the 3 leading candidates. Candidate A: he associates with crooked politicians, consults with astrologers, he's had 2 mistresses, and he chain smokes and drinks up to 10 martinis a day. Candidate B: he was ejected from office twice, sleeps until noon, used opium in college, and drinks large amounts of whiskey every evening. Candidate C: he is a decorated war hero, he's a vegetarian, doesn't smoke, drinks occasional beer, and hasn't had any extramarital affairs. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds and I'm going to think myself as to who would we pick as a good world leader. So let's think about it. Just candidate A, B, or C. So candidate A is Franklin D. Roosevelt. Candidate B is Winston Churchill. And candidate C is Adolf Hitler. So just because you do right things doesn't mean that your actions also follow it. By this, I mean that just because overall, as a general superficial person, you might act right, doesn't mean that you actually pull through and do ethical decisions and think of others when you're doing it. So again, don't be egocentric, think about your consequences, and always, always be honest. Thank you for joining me on this online training. My name is Yvette Maldonado. It was a pleasure to be here today.